The crystal chandeliers above the ballroom glittered like falling stars, reflecting off hundreds of champagne glasses raised in celebration. My father loved spectacle. He believed success meant being seen, admired, and feared all at once. Tonight was his retirement gala. 35 years of building Sterling Freight Corporation, surrounded by politicians, investors, and every person who had ever benefited from his power. And then there was me. I stood near the back of the room, invisible by design. My black satin dress was elegant but understated, chosen specifically so it wouldn't draw attention. I had learned years ago that attention, in my father's world, was usually a weapon. Before we cut the cake, my father announced from the stage, gripping the microphone like he owned the oxygen in the room, "I want to acknowledge my family." A polite ripple of applause moved through the crowd. He gestured toward my stepmother, who smiled like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Then he nodded toward my stepbrother, Daniel, who raised his glass confidently, already basking in approval he hadn't earned. Then my father's eyes found me. "And this," he said, pointing directly at me, his voice thick with amusement, "is my daughter, Lillian." 200 heads turned in synchronized curiosity. "She has no degree, no career, and absolutely no plan for her future," he continued, chuckling. "She just freeloads off the family name." Laughter erupted across the ballroom like breaking glass. It wasn't hesitant laughter. It was comfortable, agreeable, the kind of laughter people give when they want to stay in good favor with the man paying for their drinks. My stepbrother smirked openly. My stepmother lowered her gaze, pretending embarrassment, but her lips twitched upward just enough to betray satisfaction. I felt the familiar sting in my chest, sharp but controlled, like pressing a finger against a bruise you've already memorized. My father had humiliated me privately for years. Tonight, he simply upgraded the audience. I reached for a champagne glass from a passing tray, lifting it calmly. My heels clicked softly as I stepped forward, just enough for him to see my face clearly. Our eyes locked. "Cheers, Dad," I said, my voice steady, smooth, and almost warm. "This is the last celebration of yours I'll ever attend." The room quieted slightly, confusion replacing laughter. I turned before anyone could respond, weaving through the crowd with deliberate grace. No tears, no trembling hands, just a faint echo of whispered speculation trailing behind me as I exited the ballroom. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like freedom. I inhaled slowly, letting the scent of rain-soaked pavement replace the suffocating perfume of wealth and ego lingering from inside. Most daughters would have gone home to cry. Most daughters would have called a friend, replaying every insult until exhaustion dulled the pain. I slid into my car, adjusted the rearview mirror, and started the engine. The city's skyline reflected across the windshield like a constellation of opportunities waiting to be claimed. I didn't go home. I never had a home in his world. I drove downtown, merging onto the expressway while neon lights blurred past in streaks of red and white. My pulse remained calm, each heartbeat measured, controlled. Years of preparation had trained me to treat emotional trauma the same way I treated financial risk. Acknowledge it, calculate it, and never let it dictate your next move. 20 minutes later, my car pulled into the underground parking structure beneath a tower of mirrored glass that pierced the skyline like a blade. Employees in competing firms had nicknamed the building the Prism. They said no one could see inside it, but everything inside could see them. They weren't wrong. I stepped out, my heels echoing through the quiet structure as I crossed toward the private elevator. The biometric scanner glowed blue as it recognized my fingerprint, granting me silent access to the upper floors. The elevator doors opened directly into a dimly lit reception area. At this hour, the office was empty, but the hum of server systems and distant city traffic created a rhythm that always steadied my thoughts. I walked past the frosted glass wall, engraved with the company name in silver lettering. Apex Recovery Group. To the financial world, Apex was a discreet acquisition firm specializing in distressed commercial liabilities. To my father, it was just another competitor nibbling at market scraps. To me, it was 5 years of calculated patience. Inside my private office, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sleeping city below. I placed my clutch on the desk, removed my earrings, and crossed to the steel cabinet hidden behind a rotating bookshelf. The lock disengaged with a soft metallic click. Inside rested a single navy portfolio labeled Project Helios. I carried it back to my desk, running my fingertips across the embossed lettering. The documents inside weren't new. I had assembled them nearly a year ago: loan purchase agreements, acquisition rights, and secured creditor authorizations tied to one very specific borrower, Sterling Freight Corporation. My father's empire wasn't failing publicly, but I knew its secrets. I had spent years analyzing balance sheets he never thought I would understand, tracing hidden refinancing deals, identifying the silent fractures beneath his polished success. He believed I drifted through life without direction. In reality, I had been mapping his collapse down to the decimal point. I opened the portfolio, sliding the final and signed transfer contract onto my desk. The bank had been eager to sell the debt, too risky for traditional lenders, perfect for private recovery specialists like Apex. For 11 months, I had refused to finalize the purchase. A fragile, foolish part of me hoped distance would be enough, that I could build my own life without dismantling his. Tonight, he made that hope irrelevant. I uncapped my pen, pausing only long enough to hear his laughter echo in memory, the sound of 200 people agreeing I was worthless. My signature flowed across the paper in smooth, deliberate strokes. Lillian Sterling, Chief Executive Officer. I exhaled slowly and reached for my phone, dialing the number programmed into my private line. He answered immediately. "Tell me you finally signed it," Julian said, his voice sharp with anticipation. As Apex's lead legal strategist, he had spent months preparing for this moment. "It's done," I replied. There was a brief silence, heavy with finality. "You understand," he said carefully. "Once the funds transfer, you become the primary creditor. You control their liquidity, their assets, everything." I turned toward the window, watching the city lights shimmer like scattered embers. "I understand," I said quietly. Across town, my father was probably raising another toast, celebrating a legacy he believed would outlive him. What he didn't know was that the foundation beneath his empire had just changed ownership, and this time it belonged to the daughter he had just disowned. People assume humiliation is what breaks you. It isn't. Betrayal does. The first time I realized my father had never seen me as his daughter was not at the gala. It was 5 years ago, in a cramped leasing office that smelled like cheap carpet cleaner and disappointment. I was 27, trying to rent my first real apartment. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet 1-bedroom with enough sunlight to convince myself I was building something stable. The leasing manager, a woman with soft gray curls and apologetic eyes, slid my application back across the desk. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "With a credit score of 498 and multiple defaults, we can't approve you without a cosigner." I laughed at first. It was instinctive, defensive. "There must be a mistake," I told her. "I don't even own a credit card." She turned the monitor toward me. 3 maxed-out credit cards, a $40,000 unsecured business loan, 2 delinquent lines of credit, all opened under my social security number. Billing address, my father's corporate office. I remember staring at the screen, my ears ringing so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't need an explanation. I knew. Daniel had developed a venture capital addiction. That's what my stepmother called it when he started losing 6 figures gambling on speculative tech startups. My father had quietly bailed him out more than once. But the last time, apparently, he chose a different solution. He chose me. He used my identity like a disposable asset, something sitting idle, something no one would question. I should have reported it immediately. Identity theft, wire fraud, federal charges. But I didn't, because I knew my father. He would deny it, claim clerical error, blame an accountant, apologize with just enough sincerity to maintain control. And everyone would believe him. He was Edward Sterling. I was just Lillian, the directionless daughter. So instead of going to the police, I did something else. I accessed the accounts. My father had always underestimated me intellectually. He reused passwords, stored sensitive documents in poorly encrypted systems, and believed intimidation replaced cybersecurity. It didn't take long. Once inside, I didn't close the accounts. I didn't dispute the charges. I didn't expose him. I started paying them. Every month. Minimum balances at first. Then slightly more. I switched everything to paperless billing, rerouted confirmation emails to a private server I controlled, and monitored the activity like an auditor watching a slow-moving crime. Why? Because power isn't in the explosion. It's in the evidence. If I had shut everything down immediately, he would have escaped with inconvenience. By letting the account stay active, I let interest accumulate. I let statements generate. I created a documented timeline stretching back years. A paper trail too detailed to dismiss. But that required money. And money required independence. So while my father mocked my lack of ambition, I was building Apex. I started small, consulting contracts, analyzing distressed transport companies. I studied balance sheets at night, learned debt acquisition strategies, and partnered quietly with investors who cared about results more than pedigree. Within 2 years, Apex Recovery Group had purchased its first portfolio of non-performing commercial loans. Within 3, we controlled nearly 8% of the regional distressed freight market. And within 5, we had something far more valuable than revenue. Information. I knew exactly how leveraged Sterling Freight was. Publicly, the company looked stable. Privately, it was overextended. My father had refinanced warehouse expansions at aggressive rates. He had collateralized assets twice. He relied on rolling vendor credit lines to maintain liquidity. It wasn't failure, but it was fragile. And fragility is opportunity. Back in my office, I pulled up the secured server containing everything I had collected over the past decade. Every unauthorized account, every forged digital signature, every transfer Daniel had routed through my name. 10 years of quiet theft. 10 years of believing I wouldn't notice. My phone buzzed softly. "Julian, the bank has acknowledged the transfer request," he said. "They're relieved, honestly. Sterling Freight has been flagged internally for risk for months." I leaned back in my chair. "How much exposure are they carrying?" I asked. Enough that they were willing to discount the debt by 12% just to offload it. That meant they were nervous. Very nervous. "Good. Wire clears Monday morning," Julian continued. "After that, you're the secured creditor on record," which meant I wouldn't just own a note. I would control leverage. Debt isn't just money owed. It's authority. If he defaulted, even once, I could freeze accounts, accelerate payments, demand collateral. Legally. Cleanly. Without ever raising my voice. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the ballroom laughter echoing around me. He thought humiliation was dominance. He didn't understand that real power is silent until it moves. "I want full audit visibility," I said. "Every payment. Every transfer." "You're expecting a liquidity problem?" Julian asked. "I'm expecting arrogance," I replied. Arrogant men don't change behavior when rescued. They double down. And Edward Sterling had always believed consequences were for other people. I stood and walked toward the window again, watching traffic weave below like organized chaos. 5 years ago, I couldn't rent an apartment because of the damage he caused. Tonight, I controlled the debt, threatening his empire. People think revenge is emotional. For me, it was structural. I wasn't angry anymore. I was prepared, and for the first time in my life, my father had publicly cut me off from his world, which meant I no longer had to pretend I cared about protecting it. Monday at 9:02 a.m., the wire cleared. I watched it happen in real time. 8 figures moved from Apex Recovery Group's capital reserve into the holding account assigned to Sterling Freight's primary lender. A clean transfer. No theatrics. No announcement. At 9:17 a.m., the bank formally reassigned the secured note. At 9:21 a.m., I became my father's largest creditor. Control doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with paperwork. Julian stepped into my office without knocking. He only did that when something significant had finalized. "It's official," he said, placing a thin stack of confirmation documents on my desk. "You now hold a senior secured position. Warehouses, fleet, corporate accounts. If he breathes wrong financially, you can tighten the leash." I skimmed the first page. Sterling Freight Corporation, outstanding balance, $11.4 million. Collateralized assets listed neatly beneath. Corporate headquarters. Primary distribution warehouse. Fleet inventory. Secondary lien on Edward Sterling's private residence. He had leveraged everything. Arrogance makes men expand aggressively during good years. They forget markets shift. "Has he been notified?" I asked. Julian nodded. Formal notice went out at 9:15. Standard language. Change of servicing entity. Payment instructions updated. I checked the time again, which meant right now, across town, my father's CFO was walking into his office holding that letter. I could picture the moment perfectly. The confusion, the disbelief, the immediate assumption that it was administrative error. Because men like him don't imagine losing control until it's already gone. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. This is Lillian Sterling. Silence. Then my father's voice, tight and restrained. What is Apex Recovery Group? Straight to the point. Good. We're a private acquisition firm, I replied calmly. Why do you ask? I received notice that they acquired our debt position, he said. From First National. Yes, I said evenly. That's correct. Another pause. Longer this time. You're aware of this? He asked. I approved the purchase. There it was. The shift. Air leaving a room miles away. You. His voice sharpened. You approved. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm informing you. Apex now services Sterling Freight's senior note. You don't have that kind of capital. I smiled slightly. You'd be surprised what I have. He exhaled through his nose, the sound he made when recalculating. This is a mistake, he said. We have a long-standing relationship with First National. They were eager to reduce exposure, I replied. Your expansion loans are aggressive. Silence again. He wasn't used to being analyzed, especially not by me. What do you want? He finally asked. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was assessment. I want the terms honored, I said. Monthly payments, compliance reporting, liquidity thresholds. Exactly as written. You think this is funny? He snapped. I think contracts are binding. His voice lowered. You're playing a dangerous game. No, I corrected. I'm playing a documented one. He hung up. I didn't move. Didn't react. Across town, panic would now be spreading through executive offices disguised as strategy meetings. He would call his attorney first, then the bank, then attempt to refinance. But here's what he didn't know. Before purchasing his note, I had quietly acquired minority positions in 2 competing freight servicing firms. Both had exclusivity clauses with Apex, which meant refinancing options were limited. Not impossible, just expensive, and desperation inflates cost. By Wednesday, internal financial reports began populating my dashboard automatically. Debt ownership comes with privileges. I could see liquidity ratios, payroll projections, vendor payment delays. Daniel had authorized a discretionary luxury vehicle lease 2 weeks prior. My stepmother had increased charitable foundation withdrawals. They were spending as if expansion would cover weakness. It wouldn't. On Friday afternoon, Julian returned. He's shopping for emergency capital, he said. Private lenders. High interest. Of course he is. How aggressive do you want to be? I turned my chair toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below, unaware that empires shift quietly. Prepare Helios Phase 2, I said. Julian didn't hesitate. Phase 2 was never about foreclosure. It was about acceleration. We structured a secondary offer through a shell entity, Helios Capital Partners. Short-term bridge loan. High interest. 30-day maturity. Secured by personal guarantee. With one particular clause buried on page 16. Confession of judgment. It's legal, predatory, and devastating if triggered. You think he'll sign? Julian asked. He won't read, I said calmly. He'll skim. Arrogant men always skim. They assume superiority replaces caution. By Monday morning, Helios Capital's offer sat on his desk. By Tuesday afternoon, he signed. I watched the confirmation upload to our secure server at 3:42 p.m. 30 days. That's how long the illusion would last. 30 days of believing he'd stabilized liquidity. 30 days of thinking he outmaneuvered a nameless lender. He didn't know the lender was me. And he definitely didn't understand page 16. Julian studied me carefully. You realize, he said, once this triggers, there's no reconciliation. I looked at the digital countdown clock, now embedded in my dashboard. 30:00:00:00. I stopped looking for reconciliation the night he introduced me as a failure. I said softly. This wasn't rage. It wasn't impulse. It was mathematics. He had built his empire on leverage. I had simply learned the language. And now, the clock was ticking. 30 days sounds generous. It isn't. It's a psychological sedative. The first week after he signed the Helios Capital loan, everything went quiet. Too quiet. No angry calls. No legal threats. No dramatic confrontations. That told me everything. He believed he had solved the problem. Men like my father don't fear debt. They believe debt is leverage, something to be managed, flipped, manipulated. They forget that leverage only works when you control the fulcrum. And I did. By day 6, payroll cleared. I saw it hit the system through the reporting access attached to my secured creditor position. Warehouse staff paid. Drivers paid. Management bonuses partially restored. He wanted morale stabilized. He wanted the illusion of strength maintained. By day 8, Daniel posted a photo online. New watch. Imported. Caption. Pressure builds diamonds. I saved the screenshot to a folder labeled Evidence, Behavioral Pattern. Reckless spending during liquidity crisis. Textbook. By day 12, vendor payments began delaying again. Not drastically. Just enough to indicate strain. He was juggling. Using the Helios funds to plug operational gaps instead of restructuring liabilities. Exactly as predicted, Julian stepped into my office late Thursday afternoon. He hasn't cut personal expenses, he said. Your stepmother transferred funds from the corporate charitable foundation to cover private event costs. I nodded. Liquidity position. Declining. If revenue doesn't spike, he won't make the 30-day balloon. He won't. I didn't say it out loud, because acknowledging inevitability sometimes feels like mercy. And this wasn't mercy. It was consequence. Week 3 brought visible tension. Internal memos reflected temporary cash flow adjustments. Vendor relationships strained. Warehouse expansion paused. Daniel stopped posting. Silence on social media is louder than celebration. On day 26, I received my first indirect outreach. A mutual business acquaintance requested a lunch meeting to discuss potential collaboration. Translation: my father was fishing for leverage. I declined politely. On day 28, he called. I let it ring, then answered. What are you doing? He demanded without greeting. Running a company, I replied. You structured that loan to trap me. You signed it, I corrected. You hid terms. I disclosed them. You knew I wouldn't. Read. I finished calmly. Silence. Heavy. You're trying to destroy your own family. No, I said quietly. I'm enforcing a contract. His breathing sharpened. You think you've won something? I think you miscalculated. He lowered his voice. You don't have a stomach to execute. That almost made me smile. He still thought this was emotional. He still believed I wanted approval. I learned from you, I said softly. Never bluff. I ended the call. Day 30 arrived without ceremony. The city looked the same from my office window. Traffic flowed. Markets opened. At 4:57 p.m., the payment window closed. No wire. At 5 p.m., the system auto-flagged default. At 5:03 p.m., the confession of judgment clause activated. There is something almost clinical about legal enforcement. No screaming. No dramatic music. Just filings. Julian entered with a single nod. Ready. Yes. He initiated the sequence. At 5:12 p.m., the judgment was electronically filed. At 5:19 p.m., freeze orders transmitted to associated banking institutions. At 5:27 p.m., asset seizure documentation dispatched. Corporate accounts locked. Warehouse access restricted. Fleet titles flagged. Secondary lien on his residence converted to active enforcement. It was done before sunset. At 6:03 p.m., my phone exploded with missed calls. Father. Daniel. Unknown numbers. I didn't answer. At 6:40 p.m., security alerted me. They're in the lobby. Of course they were. He wouldn't call now. He would confront. I stood slowly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my blazer. Send them to conference room A, I said. Should we have security present? No. This wasn't a threat scenario. It was a reckoning. I entered the room first. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the city. A long black table centered the space. Neutral. Controlled. I took the seat at the head. Minutes later, the doors burst open. My father entered like a storm system. Face flushed. Tie loosened. Daniel behind him, pale. My stepmother rigid and silent. You froze my accounts, he roared. I folded my hands on the table. Yes. You seized my warehouse. Yes. You can't. I can, I said evenly. You signed. He slammed both palms on the table. You think this is funny? This is my company. No, I replied calmly. It's collateral. The room went still. Daniel stepped forward. Dad, let me handle this. Handle what? I asked softly. The car lease? The vendor defaults? The personal withdrawals? He froze. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the documents. The loan. The default. The executed judgment. And beneath it, the 10-year fraud record. My father's eyes flicked downward. Color drained from his face. You wouldn't, he whispered. I would, I said. Silence expanded between us. You have two options, I continued. Option 1, challenge the enforcement. I release this file to federal investigators. I tapped the fraud evidence lightly. Option 2, sign voluntary surrender. You walk away. No criminal referral. Daniel's voice cracked. This is insane. No, I said quietly. This is structured. My father stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a daughter. As a threat. You've always been vindictive, he muttered. No, I corrected. I've always been patient. He looked at the pen on the table. Then at the window. Then back at me. For the first time in my life. He looked small. And that was before he reached for the pen. The pen looked heavier in his hand than it should have. For a man who had signed multi-million-dollar contracts without blinking, this one seemed to weigh 100 pounds. He didn't read it. Not really. He skimmed the header, saw the words voluntary surrender of secured assets, and stopped pretending. You planned this, he said quietly. Yes. Not defensive. Not proud. Just factual. Daniel shifted beside him. Dad, don't sign anything. We can fight this. We'll get an injunction. This is intimidation. I turned my gaze to him. You already waived injunction rights, I said evenly. Page 16. Confession of judgment. His jaw tightened. He remembered now. Or at least pretended to. My stepmother finally spoke, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. Lillian, this is your family. Family. Interesting word. Family was using my identity to fund your son's gambling debt. Family was watching 200 people laugh while your husband called me a freeloader. Family was silenced when I couldn't rent an apartment because my credit was destroyed. I'm offering freedom, I said calmly. Not punishment. My father let out a humorless laugh. You're enjoying this. No, I said. I outgrew enjoyment. Silence settled again. He looked older than he had at the gala. Smaller. Not because his power was gone, but because it had shifted, and he could feel it. What happens if I sign? He asked. You relinquish claim to Sterling Freight, I replied. All operational authority transfers to Apex Oversight. The house lien converts to asset liquidation. Remaining personal accounts are untouched. And the fraud file, sealed, archived, never filed. Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. Dad! My father looked at him. That look told me everything. He had protected Daniel for years, covered losses, absorbed risk, shifted damage onto me without hesitation. But now protection had a cost, and he was the one paying. He picked up the pen again. For a split second, just one, I saw hesitation. Not about money, not about reputation, about control. Then he signed, Edward Sterling. The signature was sloppier than usual. Julian, who had entered quietly during the exchange, collected the documents without a word. It's done, he confirmed. Daniel looked at me like I had committed treason. You destroyed us. No, I said softly. You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped absorbing it. Security escorted them out. Not aggressively, just procedurally. No shouting this time. No threats. Just stunned silence. When the elevator doors closed, I remained seated. I expected triumph. Instead, I felt still. Power isn't loud. It's quiet once it settles. Julian studied me carefully. You okay? Yes. Regret? No. He nodded once. We'll initiate transition immediately. Press release? Not yet. Public humiliation had started this. Public exposure would not end it. I didn't need spectacle. I needed closure. The fallout began within hours. Vendors received notice of ownership restructuring. Employees were informed that Sterling Freight would continue operations under interim Apex management. The market reacted cautiously. Industry blogs speculated about aggressive debt acquisition. No one mentioned my name. By morning, Daniel's social media accounts were deactivated. By afternoon, the local business journal reported that Edward Sterling had stepped down due to strategic restructuring. Polite language for collapse. I drove past the old corporate headquarters that evening. The sign still read Sterling Freight Corporation. For now. Inside, employees moved carefully, uncertain but not panicked. Payroll would continue. Operations would stabilize. I wasn't there to dismantle livelihoods. I was there to correct architecture. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. It was my father. His voice sounded different. Not angry. Just tired. You could have told me, he said. Told you what? That you were capable of this. I looked out at the building bearing his name. You never asked, I replied. Long pause. I did what I thought was necessary, he said quietly. I know. You could have ruined me. I didn't. Silence again. Then something unexpected. I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than anything he'd ever offered. Yes, I said simply. Another pause. Is there anything left? He asked. It wasn't about money. It was about relevance. You still have your freedom, I said. Use it better than you used me. He didn't respond. The line disconnected. I didn't call back. 2 weeks later, the Sterling name came down from the building. Apex Logistics Holdings replaced it. Clean. Neutral. Efficient. I stood across the street watching workers remove the old signage. 5 years of planning. 30 days of execution. 10 years of patience. Gone. Not erased. Transferred. Julian joined me on the sidewalk. Feel different? He asked. Yes. How? Lighter. He nodded toward the skyline. You built something bigger than revenge. I considered that. He was right. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's liability. I was the controlling interest. The city looked different from the 37th floor now. Luminous, steady, indifferent to the chaos of human ambition below. I sipped my coffee and watched morning traffic flow like liquid metal, each car a reminder that life moves on, regardless of ego or legacy. 4 years, I had measured myself against my father's approval. Every misstep I made, every opportunity one missed, became evidence in his eyes that I was unworthy. And for decades, I let his judgment define my world. Until tonight, until I finally realized that approval isn't validation, it's permission. And I had learned I didn't need permission from anyone. I pulled the final folders from Project Helios off the shelf. 10 years of careful documentation, meticulously labeled, digitally backed up. All the proofs of fraud, of stolen identity, of misappropriated assets. I didn't need to touch them again, but they were mine. Not because I needed to punish, but because I had earned control. Ownership. Authority. Every single brick in the wall of power I had built was legitimate. Legal. Unassailable. The phone buzzed. It was my grandmother, the one who had quietly supported me when no one else did. I smiled and pressed speaker. You did it, she said simply, her voice trembling slightly. You really did it. I did, I replied, letting the weight of those words settle around us. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done. You've reclaimed yourself, Lillian, she said. Not just the money, not just the company. You've reclaimed your dignity. I let that sink in. It wasn't about revenge, though it had been satisfying. It wasn't about proving him wrong, though that had been inevitable. It was about reclaiming the part of myself I had let him try to erase. The part that mattered. The part that was competent, intelligent, and unstoppable when pushed. Later, I walked across the office floor to the massive glass windows overlooking the city. The wind whipped against the building, but it didn't matter. I had built a fortress out of patience and knowledge. I had endured humiliation, deceit, and years of invisible struggle. And now the view was mine. I thought briefly of my father, of Daniel, of my stepmother. They were all learning lessons, but lessons aren't always immediate. Sometimes consequences take time to settle in. They had 30 days to feel secure, to think they could outmaneuver me. They had failed, Not because I had struck blindly, but because they had never noticed the infrastructure of strategy beneath my calm exterior. I had won, yes, but more importantly, I had never stopped planning. I glanced at the Apex Recovery dashboard on my laptop. Every portfolio balanced, every acquisition on track, every risk calculated. I was the architect now, not just of financial power, but of autonomy. I didn't need to seek validation in the form of laughter or praise. My metrics, my control, my foresight, these were the real markers of achievement. As the day progressed, I watched media reports reference the transition quietly. Neutral language. No scandal. No sensationalism. Sterling Freight's collapse became a case study in corporate risk management, a lesson in financial prudence for competitors. No one suspected the hands behind the shift. That was deliberate. Subtlety is far more powerful than spectacle. My father had always believed in showing power. I had learned that the absence of panic, the quiet execution of plans, is far more terrifying and far more effective. I picked up my phone and dialed an old number. It was disconnected. I smiled. I had severed the last technical tie to their world. I didn't need their validation, their acknowledgement, or their presence. Freedom, it seemed, tasted like silence. Clean, absolute silence. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat, your own thoughts, your own worth without interruption. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I poured myself a glass of champagne. I raised it quietly, alone in the glass box that had become my sanctuary, my headquarters, my observatory. To reclamation, I whispered, letting the words resonate through the stillness. Not revenge, not malice. Reclamation. I had reclaimed my dignity, my power, and my identity. I had claimed a future on my own terms, built on intelligence, patience, and relentless strategy. The reflection in the window caught my eye. I looked at the woman who had endured humiliation, invisibility, and betrayal. I saw her strength, her resilience, her calm determination, and I knew that no gala, no mockery, no inherited ego could ever define her again. She was free. I placed the glass on the desk, letting it catch the last rays of sunlight. Outside, the city continued, unaware of the quiet revolution that had just concluded within these walls. I didn't care. I had never needed them to notice. And in that silence, I finally understood something essential, letting go of toxic power, of abusive influence, of people who diminish you. It's not losing. It's reclaiming. Every humiliation, every slight, every act of betrayal had led me here. And here was enough. More than enough. I turned from the window, the skyline fading into evening lights, and smiled. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt liberation. The kind of liberation that comes when you stop being defined by the expectations of others and start living under the authority of your own choices. I was Lillian Sterling, daughter, survivor, creditor, strategist. And for the first time, I belonged fully to myself. The city breathed below me, indifferent yet magnificent. And for the first time, so did I.